So now that we know what hormones are, we need to look at the organs that are part of the endocrine system and where hormones come from and how they work and all of that. So we need to start with the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So up here in this weird picture that I drew, we have the hypothalamus. So hypothalamus is here, and this little stalk area is the infundibulum, and that of course connects the pituitary gland, which is this whole thing. So this back part is the posterior pituitary, and the front part is the anterior pituitary. And the pituitary gland is separated into posterior and anterior. The anterior is glandular, so it's glandular tissue, and the posterior is neural. And up here I have the hypothalamus, and you can see that the posterior pituitary is really just an extension of the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus, they call the pituitary gland the master gland, but the pituitary gland doesn't do anything that the hypothalamus doesn't tell it to do. So it does this basically two ways. So if we look at the posterior pituitary first, the posterior pituitary contains hormones that are synthesized by the hypothalamus. Okay, so basically, again, as I said, posterior pituitary, the posterior pituitary is neural tissue. The hypothalamus is neural tissue, and up here in the hypothalamus there are nuclei, and so here's one, and here's another nuclei. And in the nuclei are going to be cell bodies. We know that. That's what they contain, cell bodies of neurons that are in the central nervous system. And these neurons extend into the posterior pituitary, just like that. So this top one here I'm going to call the paraventricular nucleus. So paraventricular nucleus. And it synthesizes a hormone called oxytocin. The other nuclei is called the supraoptic nucleus. Supraoptic nucleus. And it makes ADH. Now, when they make these hormones, they are stored in the axon terminals that are located here in the posterior pituitary. And when the hypothalamus knows that we need these things, either oxytocin or ADH, it sends action potentials down here that will secrete those substances into the blood. Okay, so these neurons actually hold hormones. Okay, so that's basically how the posterior pituitary works. It doesn't really do that much other than hold those hormones that are made by the hypothalamus, the paraventricular nucleus and the supraoptic nucleus, hold those hormones, ADH and oxytocin, and when the hypothalamus tells it to, it dumps them into the blood. So the anterior pituitary is different. It's glandular, okay? So basically, the hypothalamus, again, has nuclei up here that contain neurons that synthesize something called releasing hormones. So these releasing hormones are connected to, or these nuclei that have releasing hormones are connected to a capillary bed. So here's a capillary bed. And that capillary bed has vessels that go down the infundibulum into the anterior pituitary and connect to another capillary bed. Okay, so this system right here is called the hypophyseal portal system. Hypophyseal portal system. A portal system is two capillary beds that are connected, and that is what this is, the hypophyseal portal system. And the hypothalamus will dump its releasing hormones into this is the first capillary bed, and they will come down into the second capillary bed. And this is where we then causes the release of a stimulating hormone. Okay, so the majority of the 6 hormones that come out of the anterior pituitary are stimulating hormones, but there are 2 that are actual hormones that go out and have target organs. Okay, so we will talk about that in just a bit. But once those are secreted out of that second capillary bed, then they go into the bloodstream. Okay, so that's basically how the anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary work with the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland, very important, secretes some major hormones for the endocrine system, but never does so without being told by the hypothalamus through releasing hormones.